The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Sarah Martinez walked through the gates for what she thought would be another routine day. At 28, she had already earned a reputation as one of the most dedicated civilian contractors working with the Defense Department. Her expertise in advanced weapon systems had brought her to this classified facility in Nevada, where she spent her days analyzing and improving military equipment. Sarah had always been different from other women her age. While her friends were planning weddings and discussing fashion, she found herself fascinated by the mechanics of precision instruments and the science behind ballistics. Her father, a retired Navy SEAL, had encouraged this interest from a young age, teaching her to shoot and explaining the importance of understanding the tools that kept soldiers safe. The base buzzed with its usual activity as Sarah made her way to the weapons testing facility. Soldiers in crisp uniforms moved with purpose, their boots creating a rhythmic pattern on the concrete paths. The desert air was already warming up, promising another scorching day in the Nevada heat. Sarah adjusted her security badge and pushed through the heavy doors of Building 7, where the most sensitive projects were housed. Inside, the facility hummed with the sound of machinery and quiet conversations. Sarah's workspace was in the back corner, surrounded by computer monitors, technical manuals, and various weapon components. She had been working on a special project for the past 6 months, analyzing the effectiveness of different ammunition types for special operations units. The work was meticulous and required absolute precision, as the lives of soldiers depended on the reliability of their equipment. As Sarah settled into her chair and powered up her computer, she noticed an unusual email in her inbox. The subject line read, "Urgent Request, Special Operations Division." She clicked it open and began reading. The message was from Colonel James Wright, a man she had only met once during a brief orientation session. He was requesting her immediate presence in Conference Room Alpha for a classified briefing. Sarah felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. Conference Room Alpha was reserved for the highest-level meetings, and she had never been invited to one before. She quickly gathered her security clearance documents and made her way through the maze of corridors to the conference room. The hallway seemed longer than usual, and she could hear her own heartbeat as she approached the imposing door. When she entered the room, she was surprised by the number of people present. Around the oval table sat various military officials, all wearing serious expressions. At the head of the table was Colonel Wright, a stern-looking man in his 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes. To his right sat General Patricia Harrison, a woman whose reputation for toughness was legendary throughout the military. Sarah had only seen the general from a distance before, and being in the same room felt surreal. Colonel Wright gestured for Sarah to take a seat near the middle of the table. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room studying her, evaluating her presence among these high-ranking officials. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and Sarah wondered what kind of situation required her specific expertise. The colonel cleared his throat and began speaking in a measured tone. "Ms. Martinez, thank you for joining us on such short notice. We have a situation that requires immediate attention, and your expertise in ammunition analysis makes you uniquely qualified to assist us." He paused, looking around the table at the other officials. "What I'm about to share with you is classified at the highest levels. The information cannot leave this room under any circumstances." Sarah nodded, her mouth suddenly feeling dry. She had worked on classified projects before, but the seriousness in the colonel's voice suggested this was different from anything she had encountered. General Harrison leaned forward, her piercing gaze fixed on Sarah. "3 days ago, our intelligence network intercepted communications about a planned attack on one of our overseas bases. The attackers are believed to be using advanced body armor that our standard ammunition cannot penetrate effectively. We need to modify our defensive capabilities immediately." The general's words hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah understood the gravity of the situation, but she also felt a surge of determination. This was exactly the kind of work she had trained for, the reason she had dedicated her career to understanding weapons systems. Colonel Wright continued the briefing, explaining that the base in question housed critical intelligence operations and could not be evacuated without compromising national security. The attack was expected within the week, giving them very little time to prepare an effective defense. The enemy's armor was reportedly made from a new ceramic composite that traditional bullets could not penetrate. As Sarah listened to the details, her mind began racing through possible solutions. She thought about the various ammunition types she had studied, their penetration capabilities, and the physics behind armor-piercing technology. There were experimental rounds that showed promise, but most were still in development phases and had not been thoroughly tested. One of the younger officers at the table, Lieutenant Anderson, spoke up with skepticism in his voice. "With respect, sir, wouldn't it be more appropriate to consult with our senior ballistics experts? This situation seems beyond the scope of a civilian contractor's experience." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. She had worked harder than anyone to prove herself in this male-dominated field, and comments like this reminded her of the constant uphill battle she faced. However, she maintained her composure, knowing that professionalism was crucial in this environment. General Harrison's expression darkened at the lieutenant's comment. "Lieutenant Anderson, Ms. Martinez has the highest security clearance among our civilian contractors and has consistently provided valuable insights on our weapons systems. Her analysis has improved the effectiveness of our equipment on multiple occasions." The lieutenant shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but said nothing further. Sarah appreciated the general's support, but she knew she would have to prove herself through her actions, not through someone else's endorsement. Colonel Wright handed Sarah a thick folder containing intelligence reports and technical specifications. "We need you to review all available information about the enemy's armor and recommend the most effective countermeasures. You have access to our entire ammunition inventory, including experimental rounds that are not yet in general circulation." Sarah opened the folder and began scanning the documents. The intelligence reports contained detailed photographs and analysis of the armor system the enemy was using. It was indeed an advanced design, incorporating multiple layers of ceramic plates and flexible materials that could dissipate the energy from conventional bullets. As she studied the images, Sarah's mind began forming a picture of what would be required to penetrate this armor. The key would be finding ammunition that could maintain its velocity and structure while punching through multiple layers of different materials. It was a complex physics problem that required understanding both the properties of the armor and the ballistics of various ammunition types. The meeting continued for another hour, with various officials providing additional intelligence and discussing logistical challenges. Sarah took careful notes, asking pointed questions about the specifications of the armor and the expected engagement distances. The more she learned, the more convinced she became that conventional solutions would not be sufficient. After the meeting concluded, Sarah returned to her workspace with a new sense of purpose. She had been given access to the facility's most advanced ammunition storage area, where experimental rounds were kept under strict security protocols. The weight of responsibility felt enormous, knowing that the lives of soldiers depended on her recommendations. She spent the rest of the day immersed in technical manuals and ballistics data. The facility's database contained information about hundreds of different ammunition types, each with detailed specifications about velocity, penetration capabilities, and effectiveness against various materials. Sarah created a spreadsheet to compare the different options, ranking them by their potential effectiveness against the enemy's armor system. As the hours passed, one particular ammunition type kept appearing in her calculations as the most promising option. It was an experimental round that had been developed for special operations but had never been deployed in actual combat situations. The specifications looked impressive, but Sarah knew that real-world performance could differ significantly from laboratory results. The ammunition was stored in a high-security vault that required multiple authorizations to access. Sarah would need approval from both Colonel Wright and General Harrison to even examine the actual rounds. The bureaucratic process could take days, time they didn't have if the intelligence about the planned attack was accurate. That evening, Sarah remained at the facility long after most of the staff had gone home. The building felt different in the quiet hours, with only the hum of ventilation systems and the occasional footsteps of security personnel breaking the silence. She continued her research, diving deeper into the technical specifications and looking for any potential weaknesses in her analysis. As she worked, Sarah thought about her father and the stories he had told her about his military service. He had always emphasized the importance of preparation and attention to detail, explaining how the smallest oversight could have life or death consequences in combat situations. Those lessons had shaped her approach to her work, driving her to be thorough and methodical in everything she did. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Sarah reviewed the intelligence reports for the third time. Something about the enemy's armor system seemed familiar, but she couldn't quite place where she had seen similar technology before. She made a note to research the armor's development history, wondering if understanding its origins might reveal weaknesses that weren't apparent from the technical specifications alone. By midnight, Sarah had narrowed down her options to 3 potential ammunition types. Each had advantages and disadvantages, and she would need to conduct more detailed analysis to make a final recommendation. The experimental round remained her top choice, but she wanted to be absolutely certain before putting soldiers' lives at risk. As she finally prepared to leave for the night, Sarah felt a mixture of exhaustion and excitement. This was the kind of challenge she had always hoped to face in her career, an opportunity to make a real difference in protecting American soldiers. The pressure was intense, but she was determined to find a solution that would give the defenders every possible advantage. The next morning would bring new challenges as she continued her research and sought approval to examine the experimental ammunition. Sarah knew that time was running out, and the fate of an entire military base might depend on her expertise and judgment. She locked her files in the secure cabinet and headed home, her mind already planning the next day's work. The desert night was cool and clear as Sarah walked to her car, the stars visible despite the glow from the base's security lights. She thought about the soldiers at the overseas base who were preparing for an attack they might not survive with conventional weapons. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a heavy cloak, but she was ready to carry that burden. Tomorrow would be the most important day of her career, and she was determined to be ready for whatever challenges it might bring. Sarah arrived at the base before dawn, her mind sharp despite having slept only a few hours. The security checkpoint seemed more thorough than usual, with guards carefully examining her credentials and scanning her bags. News of the urgent situation had clearly spread through the facility's security network, creating an atmosphere of heightened alertness throughout the base. The corridors were busier than normal for such an early hour, with personnel moving quickly between buildings and hushed conversations taking place in every corner. Sarah could sense the tension in the air as she made her way to her workspace. Everyone seemed to understand that something important was happening, even if they didn't know the specific details. Sarah's computer was already loaded with new intelligence reports that had arrived overnight. The enemy's timeline had been accelerated, and the attack was now expected within 72 hours instead of a week. This development sent a chill down her spine as she realized how little time remained to implement any defensive countermeasures. The new intelligence also contained more detailed photographs of the enemy's equipment and armor. Sarah studied these images carefully, using a magnifying glass to examine every detail of the armor's construction. The ceramic plates were arranged in an overlapping pattern that would deflect incoming projectiles, while the underlying flexible material would absorb and dissipate energy from impacts. As Sarah analyzed the armor's design, she began to see patterns that reminded her of research papers she had read about advanced protective systems. The configuration was similar to experimental armor that had been developed by several defense contractors over the past decade. This suggested that the enemy had access to cutting-edge technology, possibly through espionage or black market purchases. Her phone rang, interrupting her concentration. It was Colonel Wright, requesting her immediate presence in his office to discuss her preliminary findings. Sarah gathered her notes and research materials, knowing that this meeting would likely determine the direction of their defensive preparations. Colonel Wright's office was located in the administrative wing of the facility, behind multiple security doors that required different levels of clearance to access. The walls were lined with commendations, photographs from various military operations, and maps of overseas bases. Behind his desk hung a large American flag, its colors vivid against the neutral gray walls. The colonel looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes suggesting he had worked through the night. Several empty coffee cups sat on his desk alongside stacks of classified documents and communication equipment. The stress of the situation was clearly taking its toll on everyone involved in the operation. Ms. Martinez, The colonel began without preamble. I need your honest assessment of our options. The latest intelligence suggests we have even less time than originally thought, and I need to know if conventional ammunition will be sufficient to defend our personnel. Sarah took a deep breath before responding. She had spent years building her reputation on honest, accurate assessments, and this was not the time to compromise her principles for the sake of optimism. Sir, based on my analysis of the enemy's armor system, conventional ammunition will not be effective, she said directly. The ceramic plates are designed to shatter standard bullets, while the underlying material absorbs the remaining energy. Our standard military rounds simply don't have the necessary characteristics to penetrate this type of protection. The colonel's expression grew grim as he processed this information. Sarah could see him mentally calculating the implications of her assessment, understanding that the lives of everyone at the overseas base were now in even greater jeopardy. What alternatives do we have? He asked, leaning forward in his chair. Sarah consulted her notes before responding. I've identified 3 experimental ammunition types that might be effective, but I'll need to physically examine them to make a final recommendation. The most promising option is a round that was developed for special operations, but has never been used in actual combat. The colonel reached for his phone and began dialing an extension. General Harrison, could you join us in my office immediately? Ms. Martinez has completed her preliminary analysis. He hung up and turned back to Sarah. The general will want to hear your recommendations directly. While they waited for the general to arrive, Colonel Wright shared additional intelligence that had come in during the night. Satellite imagery showed that the enemy forces were larger than initially estimated, with more advanced equipment than their intelligence network had previously detected. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and time was running out for effective countermeasures. General Harrison arrived within minutes, her uniform crisp despite the early hour. She moved with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions under extreme pressure. Her presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room, bringing a sense of focused urgency to the discussion. General, the colonel began, Ms. Martinez has determined that conventional ammunition will not be sufficient against the enemy's armor. She's identified experimental alternatives, but needs access to our special weapons vault to make final recommendations. The general's piercing gaze fixed on Sarah. Which experimental rounds are you considering? And what makes you believe they'll be more effective than our standard ammunition? Sarah opened her folder and pulled out detailed specifications for the 3 ammunition types she had identified. As she explained the ballistics and penetration characteristics of each option, she could see both officers following her technical explanations with growing understanding. The most promising round was designated as Black Talon in the military's classification system. It featured a unique design that combined traditional armor-piercing capabilities with advanced materials that maintained structural integrity while penetrating multiple layers of protection. The specifications suggested it could defeat armor systems far more advanced than anything currently deployed by enemy forces. The Black Talon round uses a tungsten carbide penetrator surrounded by a specially designed jacket that peels away upon impact, Sarah explained, referring to her technical notes. This design allows it to maintain velocity and structure while punching through ceramic armor plates. Laboratory tests show it can penetrate targets that stop conventional armor-piercing rounds. General Harrison studied the specifications with interest, her expression revealing both concern and cautious optimism. What's the availability of these rounds, and how quickly can we deploy them to the overseas base? This question highlighted one of the major challenges they faced. The Black Talon ammunition was still in experimental phases, with only limited quantities available for testing purposes. Manufacturing additional rounds would take weeks or months, far longer than they had available. That's the problem, General, Sarah admitted. The entire inventory consists of fewer than 500 rounds, all stored in our high-security vault. It was originally developed for a special operations program that was later canceled due to budget constraints. The general's expression darkened as she considered the implications. 500 rounds might not be sufficient for a sustained defense, particularly if the attack involves the large force that intelligence is now suggesting. Colonel Wright interjected with a question that had been troubling Sarah since she first read about the Black Talon specifications. Ms. Martinez, you mentioned that this ammunition was developed for special operations. What can you tell us about the program it was designed for? Sarah hesitated before responding, knowing that her next words might reveal information that was classified beyond her clearance level. The documentation indicates it was part of a program called Silent Thunder, designed to eliminate high-value targets protected by advanced armor systems. The program was classified above my clearance level, so I don't have details about its specific applications. The mention of Silent Thunder seemed to have an immediate effect on both officers. They exchanged glances that suggested they were familiar with the program, but neither offered additional information. Sarah sensed that she had stumbled into an area of classification that was far more sensitive than she had realized. General Harrison stood up abruptly. "Colonel Wright, I need you to arrange immediate access to the Special Weapons Vault. Ms. Martinez will examine the Black Talon ammunition and provide a final assessment of its effectiveness against the enemy's armor system. I'm authorizing the use of whatever resources are necessary to complete this evaluation." The general paused at the door before leaving. "Ms. Martinez, I want you to understand that what you're working on could determine whether our people live or die. The enemy has superior numbers and equipment, and these experimental rounds might be our only advantage. Do whatever is necessary to confirm their effectiveness." After the general left, Colonel Wright began making the arrangements for vault access. The process required multiple authorizations and security protocols that would take several hours to complete. Sarah used this time to continue her research, diving deeper into the technical documentation about the Black Talon ammunition. The more she learned about the program that had developed these rounds, the more questions she had. Silent Thunder appeared to have been a highly classified project involving some of the military's most advanced weapons development. The documentation she could access was heavily redacted, with entire sections blacked out or removed entirely. What troubled Sarah most was the reason given for the program's cancellation. According to the files, Silent Thunder had been terminated not due to budget constraints as initially reported, but due to ethical concerns raised by oversight committees. This suggested that the ammunition might have capabilities or applications that went beyond simple armor penetration. By mid-afternoon, the authorization process was complete, and Sarah was escorted to the Special Weapons Vault by 2 armed security personnel. The vault was located 3 levels underground, accessed through a series of progressively more secure checkpoints. The final door required biometric scanning, multiple key cards, and a numeric code that was changed daily. Inside the vault, Sarah found herself surrounded by weapons and ammunition that represented decades of military research and development. The Black Talon rounds were stored in a climate-controlled section, each round individually packaged and labeled with detailed tracking information. Sarah carefully examined several rounds under magnification, studying their construction and comparing them to the technical specifications she had reviewed. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, with precision tolerances that exceeded anything she had seen in conventional ammunition. The tungsten carbide penetrator was perfectly balanced, while the surrounding jacket showed evidence of advanced metallurgy techniques. As she conducted her examination, Sarah became increasingly convinced that the Black Talon rounds would be effective against the enemy's armor system. The physics were sound, and the materials were clearly superior to conventional alternatives. However, she also began to understand why the Silent Thunder program had raised ethical concerns. The ammunition was designed not just to penetrate armor, but to cause maximum damage to whatever lay behind that armor. The tungsten carbide penetrator would fragment upon impact with soft targets, creating devastating wounds that would be difficult or impossible to treat in field conditions. This was not simply armor-piercing ammunition. It was a weapon designed to kill with absolute certainty. Sarah spent several hours in the vault, conducting measurements and taking detailed photographs for her analysis. The security personnel remained nearby, ensuring that every round was accounted for and that none of the sensitive materials left the vault without proper authorization. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah felt the weight of her decision growing heavier. The Black Talon ammunition would undoubtedly save American lives by penetrating the enemy's advanced armor, but it would also cause devastating casualties among enemy forces. The ethical implications of recommending such lethal ammunition troubled her, even as she recognized the necessity of protecting American soldiers. When she finally returned to her workspace, Sarah began preparing her final report for Colonel Wright and General Harrison. The technical analysis was straightforward. The Black Talon rounds would be effective against the enemy's armor system and would give defending forces a significant advantage. However, she struggled with how to address the ethical concerns that the ammunition's design raised. The sun was setting over the Nevada desert as Sarah completed her report. In a few hours, she would present her findings to the military leadership and help determine the fate of the soldiers at the overseas base. The decision would ultimately be theirs, but her recommendation would carry significant weight in their deliberations. As she prepared to leave for the day, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in just 48 hours. She had gone from analyzing routine weapons systems to potentially influencing the outcome of a military engagement. The responsibility was enormous, but she was determined to provide the most accurate and honest assessment possible, regardless of the personal cost. The morning briefing was scheduled for 0700 hours, and Sarah arrived at the conference room 30 minutes early to prepare her presentation. The weight of her recommendation felt heavier with each passing hour, knowing that her words could determine the fate of hundreds of soldiers stationed at the overseas base. She had spent most of the night refining her analysis, double-checking calculations, and preparing for the difficult questions she expected to face. Conference Room Alpha had been transformed into a command center overnight. Multiple screens displayed satellite feeds, intelligence reports, and tactical maps of the threatened base. Communication equipment hummed quietly in the corner, maintaining contact with commanders around the world. The atmosphere was thick with tension as personnel prepared for what could be their last chance to prevent a catastrophic attack. Colonel Wright entered first, followed by General Harrison and several other high-ranking officers Sarah had never seen before. Among them was a man in civilian clothes who carried himself with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to classified briefings. His presence suggested that this situation had attracted attention from intelligence agencies beyond the military's normal chain of command. As the room filled with personnel, Sarah noticed Lieutenant Anderson taking a seat near the back. His expression showed skepticism mixed with curiosity, and she could sense that he remained doubtful about her ability to provide solutions that experienced military experts had missed. The challenge of proving herself professionally while dealing with the life and death implications of her work created a unique form of pressure she had never experienced before. General Harrison called the meeting to order with characteristic efficiency. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have less than 24 hours before the expected attack begins. Ms. Martinez has completed her analysis of our ammunition options, and her recommendations will determine our defensive strategy. The lives of 300 American service members depend on the decisions we make in this room." Sarah stood and activated the presentation system, displaying technical specifications and ballistics data on the main screen. Her voice was steady as she began her briefing, though her heart was racing with the knowledge that every word carried enormous weight. "Based on extensive analysis of the enemy's armor system and testing of our available ammunition types, I can confirm that conventional rounds will not be effective," she began. "The ceramic plates and energy-absorbing materials in their armor are specifically designed to defeat standard military ammunition, including our current armor-piercing rounds." She clicked to the next slide, showing comparative penetration data for various ammunition types. The conventional rounds showed minimal effectiveness against the armor samples they had analyzed, confirming her earlier assessment. However, the experimental Black Talon ammunition showed dramatically superior performance, with penetration capabilities that far exceeded any other available option. "The Black Talon ammunition represents our best and possibly only chance of defeating the enemy's protective systems," Sarah continued. "Laboratory tests indicate that these rounds can penetrate the armor configuration we're facing, maintaining sufficient velocity and structural integrity to neutralize targets behind the protection." Lieutenant Anderson raised his hand, his expression showing the same skepticism she had encountered during their first meeting. "Ms. Martinez, with respect, these are laboratory results from ammunition that has never been combat tested. How can we be certain that real-world performance will match theoretical projections?" Sarah had anticipated this question and was prepared with a comprehensive response. "Lieutenant, You're absolutely correct that laboratory conditions differ from combat environments. However, the Black Talon ammunition has undergone extensive testing under various conditions, including extreme temperatures, humidity, and simulated combat stress. The performance data shows consistent results across all test scenarios. She advanced to a slide showing detailed test results from different environmental conditions. The ammunition had performed within acceptable parameters in desert heat, Arctic cold, and tropical humidity. More importantly, it had maintained its effectiveness even when subjected to the mechanical stress of rapid firing and transportation under harsh conditions. The civilian observer, who had been silent throughout the briefing, suddenly spoke up with a question that surprised everyone in the room. Ms. Martinez, are you familiar with the specific reasons why the Silent Thunder program was terminated? The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at the civilian. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, realizing that her earlier research into the program's history had touched on something far more sensitive than she had understood. The expression on General Harrison's face suggested that this question was venturing into territory that required extreme caution. Sir, the documentation I have access to indicates that the program was canceled due to budgetary constraints, Sarah replied carefully. However, I did notice references to ethical concerns that were beyond my clearance level to review. The civilian nodded slowly, exchanging glances with General Harrison before continuing. The Silent Thunder program was terminated because the ammunition proved to be too effective for its intended applications. The Black Talon rounds were designed not just to penetrate armor, but to cause maximum lethality to targets behind that armor. This raised concerns about compliance with international warfare conventions. Sarah felt her stomach drop as she began to understand the full implications of what she was recommending. The ammunition was not simply an advanced armor-piercing round. It was a weapon system designed to kill with devastating efficiency. The ethical concerns that had led to the program's cancellation were now secondary to the immediate need to protect American lives, but they remained valid considerations. General Harrison took control of the discussion before it could venture further into sensitive territory. The ethical considerations of the Silent Thunder program are noted, but our current situation requires us to prioritize the protection of American service members. We're facing an enemy with superior numbers and equipment, and conventional tactics may not be sufficient to ensure the survival of our personnel. Colonel Wright presented updated intelligence that had arrived during the night. Satellite imagery showed that enemy forces were moving into position earlier than expected, with the attack now anticipated within 18 hours instead of 24. This development compressed their timeline even further and eliminated any possibility of seeking alternative solutions. The enemy has deployed advanced equipment that we haven't seen before, the colonel explained, pointing to images on the tactical display. In addition to their armor systems, they're using sophisticated communication jamming equipment and what appears to be experimental weapons technology. Our defenders are significantly outgunned without some form of equalizing advantage. Sarah studied the new intelligence images, noting details about the enemy's equipment and positioning. The force was indeed larger and better equipped than initial reports had suggested. The attackers were professional soldiers using military-grade equipment, not the insurgent forces that American bases typically faced in overseas operations. As she analyzed the tactical situation, Sarah began to understand why her ammunition recommendation had become so critical. The defenders were facing a technologically superior force that had been specifically equipped to counter American military capabilities. Without the Black Talon ammunition, the base's defensive systems would be inadequate to repel the attack. The briefing continued with detailed discussions about deployment logistics, ammunition distribution, and defensive positioning. Military experts outlined scenarios for how the attack might unfold and how the enhanced ammunition would affect various tactical situations. Sarah found herself drawn into strategic discussions that went far beyond her usual expertise in weapons analysis. One concern that emerged during the tactical planning was the limited quantity of Black Talon ammunition available. With fewer than 500 rounds in total, the defenders would need to use the ammunition sparingly and with maximum effectiveness. This meant that only the most skilled marksmen would be equipped with the experimental rounds, while other defenders would rely on conventional weapons for suppressive fire and area denial. As the morning progressed, Sarah realized that her role in the operation was expanding beyond simply recommending ammunition. The military commanders were seeking her input on optimal deployment strategies, target prioritization, and even battlefield tactics that would maximize the effectiveness of the limited Black Talon inventory. Ms. Martinez, General Harrison said during a break in the tactical discussions, "I'm authorizing you to accompany the ammunition shipment to our overseas base. Your expertise with these experimental rounds may be crucial during the actual engagement, and our field commanders will benefit from having someone who understands the technical specifications available for consultation." Sarah was stunned by this unexpected development. She had never been in a combat zone and had no military training beyond basic firearms proficiency. The idea of being present during an actual battle was both terrifying and exhilarating, representing an opportunity to see her technical expertise applied in real-world conditions. "General, I appreciate the confidence you're showing in my abilities, but I have no combat experience," Sarah responded honestly. "I'm concerned that my presence might be more of a hindrance than a help during actual military operations." The general's expression remained firm as she replied, "Ms. Martinez, you understand these rounds better than anyone else available to us. If technical problems arise during the engagement, you may be the only person who can diagnose and solve them quickly enough to matter. This is not a request, it's an operational necessity." The remainder of the briefing focused on logistics for transporting both the ammunition and Sarah to the threatened base. A military transport would depart within 6 hours, carrying the entire inventory of Black Talon rounds along with supporting equipment and personnel. Sarah would travel with the shipment to ensure that the ammunition remained properly handled during transport and was correctly distributed upon arrival. As the meeting concluded, Sarah felt overwhelmed by the rapid escalation of her involvement in the operation. In less than 72 hours, she had gone from routine weapons analysis to becoming a key participant in a critical military engagement. The responsibility was enormous, but she was determined to see the mission through to completion. Colonel Wright approached her as the other personnel filed out of the conference room. "Ms. Martinez, I want you to know that your work has been exceptional throughout this crisis. The analysis you've provided has given us options we didn't know existed, and your willingness to deploy with the ammunition demonstrates commitment that goes far beyond your contractual obligations." Sarah appreciated the colonel's words, but her thoughts were focused on the soldiers at the overseas base who were preparing for an attack that might determine whether they lived or died. The technical specifications and ballistics calculations that had occupied her time over the past few days would soon be tested under the most demanding conditions possible. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation and briefings. Sarah received a crash course in battlefield communications, basic tactical procedures, and emergency medical protocols. She was fitted with body armor and given communications equipment that would allow her to coordinate with field commanders during the engagement. As she prepared for departure, Sarah thought about her father and the stories he had told her about combat operations. She wished she could speak with him before leaving, to draw on his experience and wisdom for the challenges ahead. However, the classified nature of the mission prevented any outside communication, leaving her to rely on her own training and instincts. The transport aircraft was already warming up on the runway when Sarah arrived with her equipment and the precious cargo of Black Talon ammunition. The military personnel loading the aircraft moved with practiced efficiency, securing everything for the long flight ahead. Sarah climbed aboard, knowing that the next time she set foot on American soil, the fate of the overseas base would already be determined. As the aircraft lifted off into the desert sky, Sarah looked down at the Nevada facility where her career had taken such an unexpected turn. In a few hours, she would be in a combat zone, surrounded by soldiers whose lives depended on the ammunition she had recommended. The weight of that responsibility settled over her like armor, heavy but necessary for the battle ahead. The military transport touched down at the overseas base just as the sun was setting behind the distant mountains. Sarah peered through the small window at the sprawling facility below, noting the defensive positions and camouflaged equipment that dotted the landscape. The base looked deceptively peaceful in the golden light of evening, But she could see soldiers moving with urgent purpose as they prepared for the attack that intelligence suggested would come with the cover of darkness. As the aircraft taxied toward the unloading area, Sarah felt her heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and fear. Everything she had worked on over the past few days would soon be put to the ultimate test in actual combat conditions. The black Talon ammunition that had performed so well in laboratory settings would either save lives or prove inadequate when faced with real-world challenges. The base commander, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Thompson, was waiting on the tarmac as the aircraft came to a stop. He was a weathered veteran with the confident bearing of someone who had survived multiple combat deployments, his uniform showing the practical modifications that experienced soldiers made to their equipment. His expression was grim as he watched the precious cargo being unloaded under heavy security. Sarah climbed down from the aircraft and was immediately struck by the intensity of activity surrounding her. Soldiers were reinforcing defensive positions, checking weapon systems, and coordinating communications equipment. The atmosphere was charged with the focused energy that preceded combat operations, creating an environment unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson approached and extended his hand in greeting. "Ms. Martinez, I've been briefed on your expertise with the experimental ammunition. I have to admit, when I first heard that a civilian contractor was being sent to advise us during combat operations, I had serious reservations. However, the intelligence about the enemy's armor capabilities has convinced me that we need every advantage we can get." Sarah shook his hand firmly, understanding that she would need to prove herself quickly in this environment. "Colonel Thompson, I'm here to ensure that the black Talon ammunition is deployed effectively and to address any technical issues that might arise during the engagement. I know my presence is unusual, but I'm committed to doing whatever is necessary to support your mission." The colonel led her to the base's command center, where tactical displays showed the positions of both friendly and enemy forces. The approaching attackers were moving in coordinated formations, using equipment that confirmed intelligence reports about their advanced capabilities. Sarah could see why conventional defensive strategies might prove inadequate against such a sophisticated threat. "The enemy has been probing our defenses for the past 6 hours," Colonel Thompson explained, pointing to markers on the tactical display. "They're using jamming equipment that's interfering with some of our communications, and their reconnaissance drones have advanced sensors that make concealment difficult. This is not the typical insurgent force we usually face in this region." Sarah studied the display carefully, noting the enemy's positioning and apparent strategy. The attackers were approaching from multiple directions simultaneously, using terrain features to mask their movements while maintaining coordination across separate units. This level of tactical sophistication suggested military training and professional equipment. The base's senior marksmen were assembled in a briefing room adjacent to the command center, where the black Talon ammunition would be distributed and its capabilities explained. Sarah found herself facing 12 experienced soldiers who would be responsible for making the experimental rounds count during the engagement. Their faces showed the intense focus of professionals preparing for life and death combat. Sergeant First Class David Rodriguez, the senior marksman, examined one of the black Talon rounds with the practiced eye of someone who understood ballistics intimately. "Ma'am, these specifications look impressive, but I need to understand the practical differences from our standard armor-piercing rounds. How will the trajectory and recoil characteristics affect our shooting techniques?" Sarah had prepared extensively for these technical questions, understanding that the soldiers' lives would depend on their ability to effectively employ the new ammunition. "Sergeant Rodriguez, the black Talon rounds have slightly different ballistics than your standard ammunition. The weight distribution and aerodynamic properties will affect trajectory beyond 600 meters, and the recoil impulse is about 15% greater than conventional rounds." She spent the next hour going through detailed technical specifications with each marksman, ensuring that they understood how to compensate for the ammunition's unique characteristics. The soldiers asked pointed questions about optimal engagement ranges, effectiveness against different target areas, and procedures for handling misfires or other malfunctions that might occur during combat. As the briefing concluded, alarm sirens began wailing throughout the base, signaling that the expected attack was beginning. Sarah felt her adrenaline surge as the reality of the situation hit her with full force. The theoretical scenarios she had analyzed over the past few days were about to become deadly reality, with real bullets and real lives hanging in the balance. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson's voice came over the communication system, calm and authoritative despite the approaching danger. All personnel to defensive positions. Enemy contact expected within 30 minutes. This is not a drill. Execute Defensive Plan Alpha. Sarah was escorted to the command bunker, where she would monitor the engagement and provide technical support if problems arose with the Black Talon ammunition. The bunker was located beneath the main command center, protected by layers of reinforced concrete and sophisticated communication equipment that would allow coordination with all defensive positions. From the bunker's observation windows, Sarah could see muzzle flashes beginning to flicker in the darkness beyond the base perimeter. The enemy was testing the defenders' response patterns and capabilities, probing for weaknesses in the defensive layout. Tracer rounds streaked through the night sky like deadly fireworks, creating an otherworldly scene that was both beautiful and terrifying. The first serious engagement began when enemy forces attempted to breach the base's eastern perimeter. Heavy weapons fire erupted from both sides as attackers wearing the advanced armor Sarah had analyzed moved toward the defensive positions. Through night vision scopes, the defenders could see that conventional ammunition was indeed proving ineffective against the enemy's protective systems. Sergeant Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio from his sniper position. "Command, conventional rounds are bouncing off their armor plates, just like the briefings indicated. Requesting permission to engage with the special ammunition." Lieutenant Colonel Thompson looked at Sarah for confirmation before responding. She nodded, knowing that this was the moment when months of theoretical analysis would be validated or proven inadequate. "All marksman positions, you are authorized to engage with Black Talon ammunition. Make every shot count." The difference was immediately apparent. The first Black Talon round fired by Sergeant Rodriguez struck an enemy soldier who had been advancing confidently behind his armor protection. The round penetrated cleanly through the ceramic plates and achieved the devastating effect that Sarah's analysis had predicted. The attacker dropped immediately, and his squad mates began seeking better cover as they realized their armor was no longer providing adequate protection. Over the next 2 hours, the enhanced ammunition proved decisive in multiple engagements across the base perimeter. Enemy forces that had been advancing aggressively began adopting more cautious tactics as they realized that their technological advantage had been neutralized. The psychological impact of seeing their advanced armor defeated was as significant as the tactical advantages the ammunition provided. However, the limited quantity of Black Talon rounds became a critical factor as the engagement continued. With fewer than 500 rounds available, the marksmen had to carefully select their targets and avoid wasting ammunition on opportunities that weren't certain to succeed. Sarah found herself coordinating target prioritization from the command bunker, helping to ensure that the precious ammunition was used with maximum effectiveness. Around midnight, the enemy forces attempted a coordinated assault from 3 directions simultaneously, hoping to overwhelm the defenders through sheer numbers and firepower. This was the most dangerous phase of the engagement, as conventional weapons had to be used for suppressive fire while the Black Talon ammunition was reserved for the most critical targets. Sarah watched anxiously as the tactical displays showed enemy forces penetrating the outer defensive perimeter in several locations. The base's defenders were holding their positions courageously, but the attackers' superior numbers and equipment were beginning to tell. Everything depended on the marksman's ability to eliminate key targets and disrupt the enemy's coordination. Sergeant Rodriguez and his fellow marksmen performed with remarkable skill under extreme pressure. Each shot with Black Talon ammunition was carefully aimed and precisely executed, taking down enemy squad leaders, heavy weapons operators, and soldiers wearing the most advanced armor systems. The cumulative effect of these targeted eliminations began to disrupt the enemy's tactical coordination. By 0300 hours, the attackers were clearly struggling to maintain their offensive momentum. The loss of key personnel and the realization that their armor provided inadequate protection had undermined their confidence and tactical effectiveness. Radio intercepts suggested that enemy commanders were considering withdrawal rather than continuing to press an attack that was costing them heavily. The final phase of the engagement came when enemy forces attempted one last desperate assault on the command center, hoping to achieve their primary objective even as their overall attack was failing. This assault brought attackers within close range of the defensive positions, creating intense firefights where the effectiveness of the Black Talon ammunition was most clearly demonstrated. Sarah watched from the command bunker as the last of the experimental ammunition was expended in defeating this final assault. The rounds had performed exactly as her analysis had predicted, penetrating the enemy's advanced armor and neutralizing threats that conventional weapons could not have stopped. The engagement was costly, but the base's defenders had successfully repelled an attack that could have been catastrophic without the enhanced ammunition. As dawn broke over the base, the full scope of the night's engagement became clear. Enemy forces were withdrawing in disarray, leaving behind equipment and casualties that testified to the effectiveness of the defensive strategy. The Black Talon ammunition had proven decisive in multiple critical moments, validating Sarah's analysis and the command decision to deploy the experimental rounds. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson found Sarah in the command bunker as the all-clear signal was given throughout the base. His expression showed exhaustion mixed with relief and gratitude as he approached her workstation. Ms. Martinez, I owe you an apology for my initial skepticism about having a civilian contractor present during combat operations, he said sincerely. Your ammunition recommendations and technical support were crucial to our success tonight. Without the Black Talon rounds, we would have faced a very different outcome. Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions as she processed the night's events. The theoretical analysis she had conducted in the safety of a Nevada laboratory had been validated under the most demanding conditions possible, but the cost in human lives on both sides weighed heavily on her conscience. The ammunition had been devastatingly effective, perhaps more so than even her calculations had suggested. In the days that followed, Sarah assisted with the detailed analysis of the engagement, documenting the performance of the Black Talon ammunition and providing recommendations for future applications. The experimental rounds had exceeded expectations in every measurable category, leading to renewed interest in the Silent Thunder program despite its previous cancellation. However, the ethical concerns that had originally led to the program's termination remained valid. The Black Talon ammunition was undeniably effective, but its lethality raised difficult questions about proportionality and compliance with international warfare conventions. Sarah found herself at the center of debates that extended far beyond technical specifications into fundamental questions about the morality of weapons design. When she finally returned to the Nevada facility several weeks later, Sarah's perspective on her work had been fundamentally changed by her combat experience. The theoretical world of ballistics calculations and penetration tests had been replaced by a deeper understanding of the real-world implications of weapons technology. The decisions she made in her laboratory directly affected the lives of soldiers who depended on that technology for survival. The success of the Black Talon ammunition led to Sarah's promotion and increased responsibility within the Defense Contractors Organization. She was offered leadership of a new program aimed at developing next-generation ammunition systems for Special Operations Forces. The work would be challenging and rewarding, representing the pinnacle of achievement in her chosen field. However, Sarah found herself carefully considering whether to accept the position. The combat experience had given her a new appreciation for the weight of responsibility that came with developing weapon systems. Every decision she made would ultimately affect real people in real combat situations, carrying consequences that extended far beyond technical performance specifications. In the end, Sarah decided to accept the new position while also advocating for enhanced ethical oversight of weapons development programs. Her experience with the Black Talon ammunition had demonstrated both the necessity of advanced defensive capabilities and the importance of carefully considering the implications of weapons technology. She was determined to ensure that future developments balanced tactical effectiveness with moral responsibility. The overseas base engagement became a classified case study used in military academies and defense contractor training programs. Sarah's role in the operation was recognized through various awards and commendations, though the classified nature of the work meant that public recognition was limited. More importantly, The soldiers who had survived the attack because of her ammunition recommendations carried the real measure of her contribution. Years later, as Sarah continued her work in weapons development, she often reflected on that night when theoretical analysis became deadly reality. The Black Talon ammunition had performed exactly as her calculations had predicted, but the human cost of that effectiveness remained a sobering reminder of the serious responsibilities that came with her expertise. The technical success had been complete, but the ethical complexities would continue to influence her work for years to come. The legacy of the Black Talon engagement extended beyond the immediate tactical success, influencing military procurement policies and ethical oversight procedures for experimental weapons systems. Sarah's analysis and field experience had demonstrated that civilian expertise could provide critical advantages in military applications, while also highlighting the need for careful consideration of the broader implications of advanced weapons technology. As she looked back on those intense days that had changed her career and perspective, Sarah remained proud of her contribution to protecting American soldiers while staying mindful of the complex ethical landscape that surrounded weapons development. The balance between tactical effectiveness and moral responsibility would continue to guide her work, ensuring that future innovations served legitimate defensive purposes while respecting the fundamental principles that guided civilized warfare.